Bell disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is meant for mature audiences only. It contains themes of infidelity and emotional conflict and is intended purely for entertainment purposes. All characters and events are fictional. Viewer discretion is advised. Emma sat on the edge of her king-sized bed, staring out the window as the sun dipped behind the trees. The golden hour light bathed the room, but there was no warmth in her heart. She was 38, a housewife, and had everything a woman was supposed to want: security, a home, a husband. But behind that carefully polished life was an aching loneliness she couldn't shake off. Her husband Mark, a senior executive at a finance firm, left early and returned late, if at all. Dinner conversations were now filled with grunts or the glow of his phone. He had become a shadow in the house, and Emma, a ghost in her own skin. Sex had become mechanical, rare, or completely absent. She wasn't even sure when they had last made love, perhaps 6 months ago? Maybe longer. Emma had tried to busy herself. Morning yoga, gardening, reading. But nothing filled the emotional void. She scrolled endlessly through social media, watching other women post about date nights, kisses in the kitchen, shared laughter, and it stung. She wanted to feel desired again. Not just noticed, but wanted. One rainy Thursday afternoon, her phone rang. It was her younger sister. Can I ask you for a huge favor?" her sister began. "Ryan just got an internship downtown, and it's only for a few weeks. I know it's last minute, but would it be okay if he stayed with you and Mark?" Emma hesitated. Ryan, her nephew, was now 24. She hadn't seen him in years, not since he was a lanky teenager obsessed with video games. She had no real bond with him, but her sister sounded desperate, and she figured the company wouldn't hurt. "Sure," Emma said with a smile she didn't quite feel. "Of course he can stay." After the call ended, she sat back and stared at the ceiling. The thought of someone else in the house, someone young, energetic, felt odd. Not bad, just different. That night, she mentioned it to Mark at dinner. "Your sister's kid? Fine, whatever. As long as he stays out of my way," Mark replied, not even looking up from his phone. Emma forced a smile. The emptiness inside her deepened. The next morning, Emma cleaned the guest room herself, something she hadn't done in years. She changed the bedsheets, dusted the window blinds, even sprayed her favorite lavender mist on the pillow. She told herself it was just about hospitality, but deep down, she was excited. Maybe this visit would break the monotony. Maybe having someone around would make the house feel alive again. She didn't know then that Ryan's arrival wouldn't just break the silence. It would shatter everything she thought she knew about herself, her marriage, and the line between right and wrong. Emma stood by the front window, watching the driveway, her hands slightly trembling. She told herself it was just nerves, after all. It wasn't every day that your grown-up nephew moved into your home. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It had been years since she had last seen Ryan, and part of her was afraid. Afraid of what? She wasn't sure yet. When the black car finally pulled in, she smoothed down her blouse and stepped out onto the porch with a practiced smile. The car door opened, and a tall, confident young man stepped out, slinging a duffel bag over his shoulder. Emma's breath caught slightly, not because she was shocked, but because she hadn't expected this. Ryan wasn't the skinny, awkward teenager she remembered. He had grown into himself, broad shoulders, tousled brown hair, a jawline that made him look older than 24. He wore a plain white t-shirt that hugged his torso just enough to hint at the muscle underneath, and a grin that was boyish but charming. "Aunt Em," he said, eyes lighting up. Emma smiled. "Ryan, look at you. You've grown up." He walked up and gave her a hug, a little too close, maybe too long. She brushed the thought away. He was just being sweet. As they entered the house, Ryan complimented the decor, joked about how grown up everything felt, and helped carry in his bags. Emma found herself laughing at his stories, surprised at how quickly they fell into a rhythm. It didn't feel like she was hosting a guest. It felt easy. That evening, Mark barely acknowledged Ryan. He muttered a hello and retreated to his study. Ryan noticed. "Uncle Mark seems busy," he said carefully as they sat on the couch watching a movie. Emma smiled weakly. That's one way to put it. Ryan glanced at her, studying her face with a sensitivity that felt unusual for someone his age. You okay? He asked quietly. Emma paused. Just tired. Long day. He nodded, but didn't push. That small act, just noticing, hit Emma harder than she expected. Mark hadn't asked her how she was in weeks. Over the next few days, the house felt more alive. Emma started waking up earlier to cook breakfast, even brushing her hair and wearing perfume again. Ryan would joke with her in the kitchen, help her load the dishwasher, and talk about everything from music to his goals in life. She listened, fascinated, not just by what he said, but by how much he noticed her opinions, her laughter, her silences. One evening, she caught him watching her as she bent down to pick up a dish. Their eyes met for a split second before he looked away. It was nothing, or so she told herself. But that glance planted something, a small, forbidden spark. And sparks, even the smallest ones, can become wildfires if fed. It was a lazy Wednesday afternoon. The air was warm and heavy, the kind of weather that made everything slow down. Mark had left early for a conference and wouldn't be home until late. Ryan had gone out for a jog, his usual afternoon routine. The house was quiet again, just the way Emma had come to both love and resent. She sat alone in the living room, wearing a light silk robe, sipping on her second glass of chilled wine. A romantic movie played in the background, one of those overly sentimental ones with soft piano music and passionate stolen kisses. The kind she used to love before her own life became so devoid of romance. The wine was doing its job, loosening her limbs and thoughts. The scenes on screen, intimate, emotional, fiery, stirred something in her. She shifted in her seat, slowly letting her fingers travel beneath the robe, just seeking something. A release. A distraction. A connection. She told herself she was alone. She told herself no one would know. Her eyes fluttered shut as she surrendered to the feeling, the thrill of being bold in her own home, after years of suppressing her needs. She imagined hands, not Mark's, but someone else's. Someone younger. Hungrier. And before she could catch herself, the image of Ryan flashed in her mind. His hands. His voice. The way he had looked at her last night, eyes lingering a moment too long. Her breath quickened. And then, the door creaked. Her eyes shot open. Ryan stood in the hallway, towel slung over his shoulder, damp from his shower, eyes wide in shock. Time froze. Emma gasped and immediately pulled her robe closed, heart racing, face burning with shame. Ryan, I thought you were out. He didn't move. His mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. His eyes flickered her legs, her chest, her trembling hands. Then he looked away, turning swiftly. I didn't see anything. I swear, he mumbled and hurried back down the hall, leaving only awkward silence in his wake. Emma sat frozen, completely horrified, her pulse thudding in her ears. What had just happened? What had she done? She got up quickly, pacing in the living room, robe tight around her. The embarrassment was crushing, but something else was there too, something dangerous. It wasn't just that she'd been caught. It was who caught her. The very person who had unknowingly been the center of her fantasies had now seen her in her most vulnerable moment. She should have felt disgusted with herself. Instead, she felt electrified, exposed, alive. That night, the air in the house changed. She could feel it. Every movement felt heavier, every sound sharper. And when she passed Ryan in the hallway, they exchanged only a look, quick, loaded, wordless. What neither of them said everything. The next morning was suffocating. Emma barely slept. Her mind played the scene over and over again, her robe parted, Ryan's eyes locking with hers, the silence, the shame, the confusion. It gnawed at her. The echo of her own name in his startled voice haunted her more than she wanted to admit. She avoided the kitchen. Avoided breakfast. Avoided him. But avoidance never solves anything. By midday, she was in the laundry room folding towels with trembling hands when Ryan's voice came from the doorway. Aunt Em. She stiffened. His tone was quiet, careful, like he was approaching a wild animal that might run. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he continued, stepping inside. I didn't mean to barge in like that yesterday. I didn't. I wasn't trying to, Emma turned, cutting him off. It's not your fault, Ryan. You didn't do anything wrong. I thought I was alone. It was a stupid mistake. But Ryan didn't leave. He looked at her differently now. Not like a boy caught in an awkward situation, but like a man searching for meaning in a moment neither of them could erase. You weren't stupid, he said quietly. You were human. Emma's throat tightened. Please, let's not talk about this. But Ryan took a step closer. Can I say something and you promise not to hate me? She hesitated. That depends on what it is. He took a breath. I didn't walk away because I was embarrassed. I walked away because I saw something. I wasn't supposed to. But I also saw you. Emma looked at him, eyes narrowing. Me? You. Not Aunt Emma. Not someone's wife. Just a woman. A beautiful one. One who doesn't deserve to be alone like that. The words hit her like a wave. She should have shut it down. She should have told him he was out of line. But instead, she just stood there, caught in the warmth of his gaze. No man, no one, had looked at her like that in years. Not even her husband. Maybe especially not her husband. Ryan, this is wrong, she whispered, eyes glistening. I know it is, he replied. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. She shook her head, backing up slightly. You're young. You don't understand. I understand more than you think, he said, voice low now, almost a whisper. I see how he treats you. Or doesn't treat you. You deserve better than silence and loneliness. Emma's hands gripped the folded towel, knuckles white. This shouldn't be happening. This conversation shouldn't be happening. But it had. The wall between them had cracked, and in its place was something tender and terrifying. She finally said, this can't go any further. I know, Ryan replied, his voice steady. But neither of them moved. And deep down, both of them knew a line had already been crossed. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Every sound, every step, every glance between them now carried an undertone, something unsaid, heavy, electric. Emma tried to go about her day like nothing had happened, but her hands trembled when she folded the laundry, and her stomach tightened whenever Ryan walked into the room. She told herself over and over, this is wrong. I'm his aunt. He's just a kid. This is temporary. But Ryan didn't feel like a kid anymore. He was confident, aware, and more dangerously gentle in all the ways Mark hadn't been in years. One evening, as she rubbed her neck in the kitchen after spending hours on house chores, Ryan walked in and noticed her wincing. Here, he said. Sit down. You're stiff. She hesitated. I'm fine. You're clearly not, he replied with a quiet smile. I'll be gentle. Against her better judgment, she turned and sat on a stool. Ryan stepped behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. His fingers were warm, firm, and skilled. As he began kneading the tension from her neck, Emma inhaled sharply. The touch was innocent. It had to be. But her skin betrayed her, goosebumps rose, and her breath caught. Better, he asked softly. She nodded, eyes fluttering closed. He moved closer. His breath brushed against her ear. You don't let yourself be taken care of, do you? Emma opened her eyes and stood up abruptly, pulling away from his hands. That's enough. Ryan didn't argue. He simply stepped back, nodded, and walked out, leaving her standing there, flustered, furious, with herself. Later that week, a storm rolled in. Mark was out of town again, his business trips becoming more frequent and his phone calls more robotic. That night, Emma sat on the couch with a blanket, listening to the thunder and rain while flipping through channels. Her heart jumped when Ryan entered the room, shirtless in pajama bottoms, damp hair tousled from the shower. I couldn't sleep, he said. Storm's loud. She nodded, avoiding his gaze. Yeah, me too. He sat beside her. The blanket barely separated them. A tense silence lingered before he spoke again. Do you regret what I saw? Emma stared at the television. It wasn't meant for you. But it happened. She turned to him. Ryan, you're confusing loneliness with something else. He smiled faintly. Maybe. Or maybe I'm the only one paying attention. Her breath caught. He was so close now. She could feel the heat from his skin. The smell of his shampoo. She didn't move. Neither did he. It was like they were suspended in time, waiting for a signal, a shift, a moment. Then it happened. Just a touch. A brush of his fingers against hers. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't bold. But it was intentional. Emma jerked her hand away, standing up quickly. This can't happen, she whispered. But she didn't sound sure. And Ryan didn't look surprised. He simply nodded once, eyes holding hers. The line was no longer blurred. It was fading. The sky had already darkened when Emma heard Mark's car pulling out of the driveway. He was off on another 2-day business trip. As usual, there was no kiss goodbye, no take care, not even a glance. Just the sound of tires disappearing into the night. She stood at the window, arms folded around herself, watching the taillights vanish into the rain-soaked streets. Inside, the silence crept back in like a slow fog. But tonight, it didn't feel hollow. It felt charged. She made herself a cup of tea and went upstairs to shower, trying to shake off the tension that had lived in her bones for days. But even the hot water couldn't rinse away the memory of Ryan's touch, the way he looked at her, not like an aunt, but like a woman who had been invisible for far too long. Emma changed into a soft robe and walked back downstairs, drawn by the flicker of the TV. She planned to grab her tea and return to her room, but as she turned the corner, there he was. Ryan, lying on the couch, shirtless again, one arm behind his head, the other casually flipping channels. He turned at the sound of her steps, and their eyes locked. She froze. "You're still up?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Storm again." She glanced at the weather outside, just a drizzle now. But they both knew the storm wasn't in the sky anymore. Emma hesitated in the doorway. Ryan shifted, sitting up. "You can sit. I won't bite." She smiled faintly, heart thudding. "That's what I'm afraid of." Still, she crossed the room and sat beside him, legs tucked under her robe. A movie played, but neither of them watched it. The silence between them deepened until Ryan broke it. "Why do you stay?" he asked quietly. "With someone who doesn't even see you?" Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Because I made vows. Because that's what people do. That's what unhappy people do." She looked at him, her defenses cracking. "You don't understand, Ryan." "I do," he replied, leaning closer. "You think you're too far gone. Like the best parts of you are behind you. But they're not. They're right here. Still alive." His hand reached out, just a soft graze against her cheek. She didn't pull away this time. "I shouldn't," she whispered. "But you want to," he answered, his voice low, certain. She closed her eyes. And then, their lips met. It wasn't wild. It wasn't desperate. It was soft, almost reverent. A kiss that felt like permission. And when it deepened, when his hands slipped around her waist and her body melted into his, Emma didn't resist. They moved together like two people who had waited too long, waited to feel wanted, to be touched with meaning. That night, boundaries faded completely. Guilt would come. Shame would follow. But in that moment, all she felt was the sensation of being seen. Loved. Alive. The morning after didn't arrive with light and clarity, it came with weight. Emma woke up before the sun, tangled in her sheets, the sound of Ryan's breathing still fresh in her ears. Her robe was crumpled on the floor, the faint scent of his cologne lingered in the room, and her body still tingled with the memory of what they had done. But reality came crashing in fast. The clock read 5:42 a.m. Mark would be back that evening. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could erase what had happened the night before. She sat at the edge of her bed, robe wrapped tightly around her, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her skin still glowed, but her eyes held panic. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. This was betrayal. Messy, real, irreversible betrayal. Downstairs, she found Ryan in the kitchen, pouring coffee. He turned and smiled softly when he saw her, shirt still off, like the night before had been a dream they could just continue. "Morning," he said, almost shy. Emma didn't smile back. "You should get dressed." His expression shifted. "Emma, don't," she interrupted, voice low. "We said nothing last night. No promises. No future. It was a mistake." Ryan put the mug down. "Is that what you think?" "I don't know what I think," she snapped. Then softened. "But I know it can't happen again." He took a step toward her. "I didn't just sleep with you, Emma. I felt something. Something real. And I think you did too." She looked at him, this young man who had offered her warmth, tenderness, and everything her husband hadn't given her in years. And yes, part of her wanted to throw the consequences to the wind and run toward that feeling. But the other part, the responsible, broken, married part, was screaming, "Ryan, you're leaving in a week." "So what?" "So," she whispered, "what happens when you're gone and I'm here with the pieces of this, of US?" He looked down, jaw tight. "If you're really unhappy, you don't have to stay. You have a choice." "But do I?" she said, her voice cracking. "Do I walk away from a whole life? A marriage, even if it's falling apart? For a fling? For a spark?" He stepped forward again. "That wasn't just a spark, and you know it." But Emma turned away. All day, the air between them remained tense. She stayed in her room. Ryan stayed quiet. When Mark returned later that night, greeting her with a distracted kiss on the cheek, everything felt surreal. Mark didn't notice the change in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, or the faint tremble in her hands. Ryan avoided the kitchen during dinner. They were back to pretending. But Emma couldn't pretend inside her mind. She had crossed a line, and now she had to live with the secret, the ache, and the impossible question clawing at her. Was one night of truth worth a lifetime of lies? It had been 2 months since Ryan left. The guest room was empty again. The bed neatly made, the air stale. No laughter echoing from the kitchen, no teasing remarks floating in from the living room. Just silence and the ticking of a wall clock that seemed louder now than ever. Emma stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair with the same strokes she had every morning for years. But she wasn't the same woman anymore. Not inside. On the surface, life had returned to normal. Mark came home late, barely speaking. Their dinners were silent again. The bed they shared was cold, divided not just by space, but by something far heavier, emotional distance that neither of them tried to fix anymore. But inside Emma lived another life. A secret life. A life that existed in memories. She'd often find herself sitting alone, staring at the couch where it all began. She'd trace the rim of her wine glass, remembering his hand brushing hers, the quiet inhale before that first forbidden kiss. She would close her eyes, and for a few seconds, she was back in that night, alive, desired, vulnerable. And then she'd open her eyes, and it would all be gone. The guilt had not faded. It never would. But what surprised her most was that regret hadn't taken its place. She had betrayed her vows, yes. But for the first time in a long time, she had also felt seen, not as a wife or a homemaker or a woman waiting in the shadows, but as someone who still had fire in her soul. Ryan had left a note tucked under her pillow the day he left. "Don't forget what you felt. You deserve to be alive, Emma. Even if it wasn't me who showed you that forever." She never replied. Never reached out. Never said goodbye properly. But she read that note every week. Now, every time Mark walked into the room and grunted hello, she wondered, did he ever truly see me? Did he ever care? And when the house was dark and quiet, she would sit in the living room and remember how quickly life can shift. How one accidental moment, one door creaking open, can change everything. Sometimes she'd laugh softly to herself. He walked in on me, and walked into my heart in the same second. She hadn't told anyone. Not even her closest friend. It was her secret burden and her secret escape. Would she ever act on it again? No. Would she forget it? Never. Because that one night shattered everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and desire. And even now, sitting alone, legs curled up on the couch where it all began, she found herself whispering his name under her breath. Ryan, just once. Just enough to feel it again. Then, like always, she locked the feeling away. And carried on with her life. A little emptier. A little wiser. But never the same. 95L.